regimes and movements were fair game. So it's not black and white, Kieran. I don't think.
No, it's not. And you did make a very good point. I mean, this relationship, if you can call it that, with the US, it's just so one-sided. I mean, yes. I recall that poor boy that was hit by a car, and how we wanted to extradite the person responsible, and how the US refused it.
Yes.
It seems like, as a country, we've lost our backbone. We just don't do what we think is right. But going back to Julian Assange,
yes.
And again, I can only agree with you on the point you made about where do you draw that line. But I think common decency...
Where do you draw it? Where do you draw it? Because you've got strong views, I can tell.
Yeah.
But I just want to get into the weeds of it. Harry Dunn is the 19-year-old you're referring to, who was killed after being hit by a car driven by an American diplomat who there were great calls to extradite her and Sakoulis, I think. And she's still there. So, yeah.
But I think she was the wife of a diplomat. I actually don't think she was one herself.
Did I not say that? Sorry. The wife of an American diplomat. Or there have subsequently been suggestions that she might have been on the payroll herself. But that's not the point. She wasn't extradited. And she killed a 19-year-old British bloke after hitting him with her car.
Wasn't Chelsea Manning, wasn't she pardoned, though, under Trump? But then I guess you look at Snowden. Is he a hero or is he a villain?
I can do that. I can ask the questions that are quite vague and a bit detail-free, mate. I thought you were going to be coming on to fill in the gaps. I've got questions coming out of my ears. But the
well, again, it's where do you draw the line? What is right and what is wrong? What is decent? What is not?
Well, I would go with Nick Cohen I'd go with Nick Cohen's article on. I mean, it appears under the provocative headline "The Treachery of Julian Assange," and it's 11 years old. But this line about him sitting down with two brilliant journalists, one of whom's been a great friend of this program since the Ukraine war started, David Lee and Luke Harding, who've written a history of WikiLeaks. Alan Rusbridger, who was on at the top of the hour, wrote a foreword to it, but they sat down with him and worried that he would risk killing Afghans who had cooperated with American forces if he put US secrets online without taking the basic precaution of removing their names, to which Julian Assange replied, well, they're informants, so if they get killed, they've got it coming to them. They deserve it. You didn't know that, did you, Kieran?
No, I didn't know, but that's where you draw the line.
Well, exactly. And therefore, the extradition, which wouldn't be necessarily for those offences, becomes a slightly murkier business, perhaps. Peter is in Derby, not far from Dore. Peter, what would you like to say?
Hello, Captain.
Hello,
this
Peter.
might buy you some time back before the top of the hour, but this is just yet another dead cat.
Well, I mean, possibly the decision to do it today might be, but I mean, there's no earthly way.
No. Come on.
What do you mean?
Scrambling around, going, hang on a minute.
Mate,
right,
he's in Belmarsh. He's been in Belmarsh for the best part of a year. This hasn't just sort of popped up. He was in the Ecuadorian embassy for God knows how long. The story hasn't suddenly been conjured up to distract attention from other things. The decision to announce it today might be, but the decision was going to have to be made at some point.
James. Right.
Peter.
So, first of all, just let me make 2 points.
Yes.
First of all, why on earth is that guy in a top security prison, right? A top security prison.
Because he ran away, breached his bail conditions and went to live in the Ecuadorian embassy.
We'll tag him. Stick a tag on his foot. The second point...
No, listen, I'm all for a bit of toing and froing, but you're being a bit of a prune. The reason he's in a high-security mission because he's a flight risk. You don't tag people who've run away from bail conditions and hidden in an embassy for years where they can't be touched by the British authorities. So that just doesn't work. Don't mate me, Peter. Of course he's going to be put in a high-security facility if he's proven...
Come on, Captain. Okay, so...
Stop calling me Captain and listen to the facts. He's proven his willingness to flee and hide from justice. Now, you might approve of that or disapprove of it, but there is no mystery as to why the authorities would then put him in a high-security facility, because he's already run away once.
Right, okay.
Next question. Captain.
Right, okay.
Corporal.
Have you calmed down? Well, yes, I call you Captain out of a mark of respect.
So do I. I know you do. I
do agree with quite a lot of your...
yes, but not this one.
A lot of your politics.
Go on, what's next?
So look, I mean, the second thing is that what he's actually done is done something very, very brave, which is go.
Some of what he's done is
a little bit illegal.
Some of what he's done is very, very brave. Some of what he's done is very, very brave. Some of it's pretty gross.
Yeah, but however, is exposed. For example, I was saying to your producer when I called in.
Yes.
You think about what we're doing right now, supporting Saudi Arabia against the Yemen.
Yeah.
Right, I'd like to see that exposed by some journalist somewhere, but I don't get to see it. I didn't watch the video, but I read about it, about the wedding, where, basically, the US, and this is not untrue, and this is fact checkable. They basically just done this wedding. And a load of people died.
And this is the problem, isn't it? And this is why he's a very 21st century figure, Assange, because there are lots and lots of grey areas. Some of the stuff that he did, and the example you cite, I think fits into this category, was unequivocally heroic journalism.
Yeah,
but some of the other stuff he did was gross. And he I think this messianic complex kicked in, where he thought he got to choose what should and shouldn't be published, whereas really there should be a greater framework of integrity and even collaboration and security involved in that process. And the problem is, this is not binary. It can never be binary.
Well, the last thing I'll say on that, mate, was Gandhi and Mother Teresa, were they both perfect?
I think Gandhi came close, but I don't want to take calls on it. Mother Teresa got an absolute revisionist analysis by Christopher Hitchens. I take your point, but this is not really comparable in that sense, because most of what has gone on here is not widely known, and there isn't even, I don't think, a widely accepted public persona here when it comes to Julian Assange. Some people are profoundly troubled by him, other people profoundly committed to him. And it is this idea, I mean, some of this stuff, James Ball, brilliant journalist and writer, he realised that WikiLeaks was not what it seemed when an associate of Assange, a stocky man with a greying moustache who called himself Adam, asked if he could pull out everything the State Department documents had, quote, on the Jews. Ball subsequently discovered that Adam was Israel Shamir, a dangerous crank, this is Nick Cohen writing in 2011, who uses 6 different names as he agitates among the anti-Semitic groups of the far right and far left. So, I guess that's the problem here, isn't it? That's why I was slightly surprised, and now I'm not, when Alan Rusbridger essentially seemed to suggest that, it was right, he did some prison time, but it's not right that he would be extradited to America and do 175 years worth, potentially. Luke's in Pollux Hill in Bedfordshire. You're going to have to be quite brief, Luke. What would you like to say?
Hello, James. First time caller, long time listener.
Well, you've picked a subject, haven't you? Blimey. Go on.
I feel that he's served long enough. He spent 3 years in a maximum security prison.
Yeah?
Okay?
Is it 3 years? Sorry, I got that wrong earlier.
Look, James, if I was Priti Patel, and that was on my watch, I would have rung up the Yanks that afternoon. I would have said, look, sorry, we're keeping him. No hard feelings. We're keeping him. Let us know when you have your next war. We got you back. Put the phone down. Job done. That was the hardest thing I had to do that afternoon. I got paid well for it. Keep working, you lot. I'm going down the pub. See you in the morning. And that's it. That's it. Job done. You know, when the Yanks want to do something, they will do it, James. We are England, and when we want to do something, we will do it too.
We should. I mean, your analysis, it ties in with an earlier one about the failure to extradite Anne Sakoulas, the wife of an American diplomat who fled Britain under diplomatic immunity weeks after her car collided with Harry Dunn. We do seem to be very much the junior partner, and I'm all for a little bit of patriotic fervour, but we are a junior partner, and if we are reliant upon America's good will moving forward, at some point Priti Patel or any Home Secretary probably would have had to do this.
Well,
it's pragmatism, isn't it? It's pragmatism and politics as much as anything else.
Yeah.
I think.
Yes, he's served long enough. We should keep him. He knows he's made a mistake. Nothing terribly bad has happened.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know about that.
No, it hasn't, and it's not going to. He knows he's made a mistake. He's not going to do that again. We should keep him. Give him his. Even if that's down for another. That's for another debate, isn't it? But I feel that he's served long enough, and we should keep him. And
so no one's saying he should never have been sent to jail at all. Although possibly the first caller might have subscribed to that point, as opposed to the idea that he is quite a few people pointing out that the potential or possible collusion with Russia is part of the conversation as well. Well, not really, because he was wanted in America long before Donald Trump started calling upon him to release more emails and do more damage to American democracy in the hope of inflating Donald Trump's presidency. So I don't know that works, but I would certainly like to know a hell of a lot more about it. Thank you, Luke. It's a sparkling debut. I tell you what, if you had to make a list of subjects you'd pick to ring into the programme for the first time, I wouldn't have had this one very near the top of it. So kudos for that. 11:46 is the time. It is 10 to 12, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I knew this would happen. Lots of criticisms of Gandhi and Mother Teresa coming in now, so thanks a lot for that, lads. That wasn't quite what I had in mind, but obviously nobody's perfect, is what I would say on that. Possible present company, except... No, I'm joking. So if I had to now pin my colours to a Julian Assange mast, I'd probably say he did some amazingly brave and important stuff. And then I'd probably want to use a word I can't really say on the radio, but he also then turned out to be a bit of a Richard, as you might say. But that's not exactly going to win me a Pulitzer Prize, is it? It's a good job you're here. Sarah is in Brighton. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I felt that I should call in listening to some of the people who were defending Julian Assange very, very strongly. I really don't feel like I have a strong opinion either one way or the other.
No.
But I wanted to let you know that I worked with people who were involved in human rights actions in Zimbabwe.
Okay.
I am Zimbabwean myself. Right. My family all live there. And some of the confidential information was released from the U.S. Embassy in Zimbabwe as well, unredacted.
Wow.
And it included the names of some of the people that I worked with and some other people that I knew. I mean, including... people who weren't involved in human rights work, who had probably gone to the U.S. Embassy for, I don't know, innocent reasons, but there were
human rights work. I'm not quibbling with you. I know you would agree with this. Human rights work are innocent reasons, but you mean not something that should necessarily have
someone who was not necessarily a human rights activist. You know, like for example, one of the people that I knew who had gone in was a farmer. Wow. Who just worked locally, in the area that I come from. And
Assange's worldview was that anybody having any association of any type with America was fair game, as I now understand it.
Well, that's what I felt. That's what I have felt over time. And I don't know.
He's kind of said so. He's kind of said so, I think.
Yeah, and I just feel that people need to understand that, whatever your opinions are on America, there are very, very good people who are trying to do things for desperate people all over the world who are still involved with America. And
some of them are, yes. I mean, the problem then becomes, what's Britain's role in this? It's interesting that you can take a step back from that by being neither British nor American and suggest, what do you think about Britain essentially saying, if you blow the whistle on war crimes committed by America, you're not safe here?
Oh, well, I mean...
Sorry.
No, I agree. No, I think, war crimes are a human rights violation as well, aren't they?
Clearly.
And, as a human rights activist, you would obviously be opposed to that. It's a complicated one when you're dealing with embassies.
Yeah.
and you're dealing with, at the time that these names of people that I knew were released, it became a very, very scary time for us. And one of the people that I worked with literally got on the next flight out of the country, because if I am sitting and reading these names on an internet screen somewhere, you can rest assured that the CIO in Zimbabwe are scrolling through it.
That's the security forces, is it? The sort of police?
Yes. Yeah, and they are very dangerous.
That's a really powerful point. And this is, it's why I'm glad that someone referred me to this article by Nick Cohen, because it is this idea that he's so convinced of his own righteousness that anybody who is in any way associated with America's military-industrial complex, as he likes to call it, is is deserving of exposure. And I can hear in your voice that must have been a truly terrifying moment. And you weren't even on the list, as it were. It was just people you knew.
No, I wasn't. And thankfully people that I know weren't affected by it, which I'm very pleased about. But the fact is there were lots of names on those lists, and there were people that I don't know. And in that kind of environment in Mugabe's Zimbabwe at the time, and just to say that Mnangagwa now is even worse.
Okay. I tell you what, if I'm unqualified to comment on Julian Assange, then you've pushed me into yet another area where I'm afraid I haven't got a leg to stand on.
Mnangagwa is not a good man.
All right.
But you wouldn't, if you are opposing people like that, and you are trying to bring about democracy, fighting for ostensibly the values that Julian Assange says he stands up for, and believes it, well, I assume.
How could you throw these people under a potential bus?
Exactly. And it's just reckless. It was.
There's an arrogance to it, I think, or I mean, as Rusbridger called it, a narcissism, an idea, an inability to contemplate that you might ever be doing anything wrong or not be on the side of the angels, which oddly seems to have left him in bed with Russian interests. Sarah, thank you. That was a really helpful contribution. Although, I don't say although. I just add that there is a sort of consensus emerging that he was not a squeaky clean enough character to have not been punished at all, but that he has probably been punished enough. And then we would not have consensus on what it is that he's been punished for. Because I don't think that the charges he faces in America are linked to the things that Sarah refers to, or the things that Nick Cohen has written about, or the things that I find unconscionable, the careless and callous disregard for the safety of people who may have had contact with American embassies on the grounds that if they've had contact with American embassies, then they are fair game, to use a phrase he used himself at a lunch with David Lee and Luke Harding. So we may not agree on what it is he has been punished for, but there is an odd consensus that he has perhaps been punished enough, and therefore extraditing him to America to face potentially 175 years in jail seems unreasonable. And then the question of why Priti Patel has done it, and indeed why now, becomes pertinent, although I bet we're close to unanimous on that one. Peter is in Crystal Palace. Peter, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. It seems a little banal following the great call you've just received.
Wasn't she wonderful? It won't be banal,
she was
Peter,
fantastic.
I'm sure.
And talking about Priti Patel in the same segment of the show somehow seems something of a contradiction. But you asked why did she do it now? And I'd like to suggest it's actually to do with the Northern Ireland Agreement, Brexit, and the Good Friday Peace Agreement. I mean, as much as Joe Biden has given his strongest support for the Good Friday Agreement, and some of your commentators have even suggested he'd go as far as to launch a nuclear trade embargo type sanctions against the UK if we were to break it and put the Good Friday Agreement at risk. So I'm just assuming that some kind of legislation or movement's going to take place on that in the next few days. And that what we are doing is buying, if not leverage, some kind of goodwill.
A little bit of goodwill, a little bit of leeway
from the US so that they might either act as an intermediary with the European Union, who would obviously go ballistic, or at least mitigate what actions they take rather than, as I say, embargoing our trade.
Or that's what they're trying to do, and it won't make the blindest bit of difference to anything, because Joe Biden is not a sort of horse trader in the way that Donald Trump was, and his commitment or the American government's interest in the Good Friday Agreement is not going to be swayed one way or the other by what Priti Patel does with Julian Assange, I think.
And also, I think the size of the US trade with the European Union as opposed to the UK will have an impact as well. But I sort of feel that is the most likely motivation. And it also gives her a double bite at the diversion cherry. So she's diverting conversation today away from perhaps ethics advisors, and then when this comes around and comes up again with the
I know, and apparently he's just pulled out of a trip to Wakefield. Boris Johnson, it's just been announced he's pulled out of a trip to Wakefield. I'm developing a mild allergy to dead cats, Peter. That's the only problem. I just think it's becoming a bit of a cat, and I'm guilty of contributing to this process. But the other thing it does, of course, is credit this shower with some sort of master plan, which I think it's increasingly clear they don't really have. Wedge issues, yes. Dead cats, don't know. But otherwise, you make some excellent points. And I tell you what's interesting. and again, this is why it's a very nuanced and complicated question, this one. Some people will see the incarceration, the self-imposed incarceration in the Ecuadorian embassy as being part of his punishment, and other people will see it as being an avoidance or an evasion of punishment. And it's both, isn't it? I mean, it's not what you'd choose to do, given the choice, but you'd probably choose it in preference to being in prison or extradited. So on we go. 4 minutes after 12 is the time. I had to have a comfort break during the news, so I don't know if this has been reported yet, but it looks as though the UK could be hosting the next Eurovision Song Contest, partly, of course, as a consequence of the fact that Ukraine probably won't be able to, for rather obvious reasons. So that's exciting, isn't it? I mean, we did so well this year for the first time in ages. It is 4 minutes after 12. Rather more importantly, Ukraine's application to join the European Union has just been accelerated in, I think, Kyiv by the leaders of Germany, Italy, and Ursula von der Leyen. I've got an interesting subject for you next. It's about Wales and the Welsh. So if you're either of those things, a Wale or Welsh, then stay tuned. I do sometimes find myself trying to understand the thinking of people I consider to be crackers. I think it's a very healthy thing to do. And there are people who genuinely think, in fact, it's not just this particularly fruit and nutcase 2019 intake of Tories. It runs deeper than that and further than that. It certainly runs to the editorial floor of the Daily Mail, who think that the BBC is biased in favour of the European Union. Now, I wish they were, perhaps less happily, if they were committed to the objective realities rather than treating opposition and support for European Union membership as a 50-50 balancing act, and it's possible I'd still be doing the odd shift there. But they're not biased in favour of they're so obviously not biased in favour of the European Union. It's ridiculous to suggest. But I do occasionally try to imagine where that conviction has come from in the minds of crazy people. And I use that word reluctantly, but accurately. And I think I know a small part of it. I think when the BBC or other outlets report stuff like what is happening in Kyiv today with the visit of key European politicians, with Macron, Scholz and Draghi. So I've got my days mixed up. So Macron, Scholz and Draghi were there yesterday to back Ukraine joining the EU. And von der Leyen has just turned up dressed in Ukrainian colours to confirm that this is moving forward, that this candidate status is being enhanced. This is on the understanding that the country will carry out a number of important reforms or lose control, as the Brexit headbangers might say. The fact that this gets reported by the BBC is what winds these people up, isn't it? Because obviously we look stupid. You've got the leaders of France, Germany and Italy in Kyiv welcoming Volodymyr Zelensky and his Ukraine into the fast track for European Union membership. And that makes us look so stupid, because a country being so keen to join is a fairly reliable indication of whether membership is a good idea or a bad idea. And we would have been there. Prior to 2016, we would have been there. The UK Prime Minister would have been there front and centre. Depending on which UK Prime Minister it was, they might even have been jostling some of the other fellas out of the way. They might have been making sure that they didn't, seem to be playing second fiddle to the Italian or the French fella or the German. We'd have been there right in the... God, that was close. Whoa, that's the closest I've ever come. Keith, keep an eye on that dump button. Right in the flipping heart of it, we would have been there. And we're not. We're not even on the sidelines. We're faffing about at home talking about how on earth the Prime Minister could have managed to behave so appallingly that yet another ethics advisor has decided to resign. And today, the EU Commission has adopted its opinions on the membership applications of Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia after assessing them against our rigorous standards. And it's a huge story. It's a global story. It's a European story. Draghi, not Draghi. Everyone's a critic. And it is a story in which we play now no part whatsoever. So I think that what your Brexit headbangers would prefer, and they've got little television stations now where they can have this version of the news, they'd prefer us just to ignore it. How dare the BBC report on a really major international news story that makes us feel like idiots? because we were responsible for leaving this institution that is so obviously worth being a member of. It's imperfect, it's flawed, it's far from infallible, but my God, what an absolute madness it would be to leave it when someone like Volodymyr Zelensky is sprinting towards it at full speed. So that, I think, is where the idea that the BBC is biased comes from. I have a look at tomorrow's papers, see how much coverage they provide to this, and whether or not it is written in terms. But that, I think, is part of it. They're so biased. You're so biased reporting things that are actually happening. We wish you wouldn't do that in order to help us cling to the idea that we're not blithering idiots who've led the country down an absolutely ridiculous path. And I want you to look out for this, actually. I want you to look out for this allegation of bias being levelled at people who refuse. This is why they've set up their own weird little TV stations. Murdoch's got a new one. I know not a lot of people have noticed. And there's the other one that Farage works for. These are television stations that have been set up by billionaires who supported Brexit in order to create a news diet that ignores the realities that they find embarrassing or uncomfortable. Turn the BBC off. It's making me feel like a racist idiot because I voted for this absolute skip fire. Oh, excellent. Here's a television channel where I can watch Nigel Farage wang on about something. That's my kind of television channel because it doesn't make me feel like an idiot for doing this thing that I did. And so that's why so now the next stage of that, it's not enough to start your own television channels with, tens of thousands of viewers. It's not enough to do that. You have to accuse the channels telling the truth of being biased. And that's why the Daily Mail have gone after Robert Peston this week and Michelle Hussain. There it is. I should probably work this stuff out off air, shouldn't I, rather than actually treat you to my own streams of consciousness as I try to unravel the madness of the profession in which I work. But I couldn't quite get my head around it. Why are they going after Robert Peston, of all people, and writing gibberish about humiliating climb downs after he corrected his own tweet entirely voluntarily on whether something was the only reason why Lord Geit would have resigned or whether it may be one of the reasons why Lord Geit has resigned. They're much, much angrier with Robert Peston for tweeting about it than they are with Boris Johnson for behaving in a way that necessitated it. Why on earth? And earlier this week, Michelle Hussain. And my ego is so overdeveloped, it pains me to say this. One of the best, if not the best, broadcast journalist in the country. That's why. Because now that they've managed to create this ludicrous ecosystem backed up by these weird little new TV channels where they won't report reality or they won't report the importance of things like Ukraine wanting desperately, pleadingly, desperately to join the European Union, how can they do that? How can they do that without writing a full-page editorial by Stephen Glover on how Ukraine is daft for giving up and surrendering its sovereignty so easily? Oh, I don't know what they'd write. They're all bonkers. There's a bloke in the Telegraph yesterday writing about how Britain is in ruins because of a leftist elite that's in charge. They've been a conservative government for 12 years. So that's why the word bias has made its way back into the news again. The people that won terrified of what they've done, so anyone pointing it out is biased. So don't report on that, don't report on this, don't mention that. It's like Basil bloody Fawlty, isn't it? And the war, don't mention you started it, no, didn't you invaded Poland? That's it. So next time you see a BBC journalist or the BBC in general being called biased, it's because they are publishing and reporting on things that liars don't want you to see, that cheats don't want you to see. And because you're not rich enough to start up your own weird little television station, they want to persuade you to concentrate on theirs. And there it is. Here endeth the lesson, 12 minutes after 12. That was not very good timing, because I've got a guest coming up at 12:30, and I'm supposed to be launching a new topic that I think is a little bit tricky. But I don't want to do another 10-minute VIM, very important monologue, after the 12:15 hiatus. So I'm going to try and do it in 2 minutes. A 2-minute monologue. A TMM. A 2-minute monologue, which will also be a very important monologue, but which essentially hinges upon one simple question. Wales needs a rebrand because it is only known for sheep, wet weather and rugby, MPs have been told. The nation should instead promote its adventure tourism destinations, its amazing food and drink, and numerous heritage sites. This is the boss of the tourist attraction Zip World speaking to the Welsh Affairs Committee on Wednesday. And as with Julian Assange, this will be the only radio programme that you hear today that draws comparisons between its treatment of Wales and its treatment of Julian Assange, by the way. I can be fairly confident of that. But as with Julian Assange, I realised as I read this that Wales is a fairly large hole in my United Kingdom cultural palette. I can wax lyrical about parts of Scotland, parts of East Anglia, parts of the southeast, parts of the northwest, parts of the Midlands where I grew up. I can wax lyrical about pretty much any part of the United Kingdom except perhaps Wales. And I wonder if that is a symptom of the problem being described here. The chief exec, I could have a crack at Portmeirion and Abbot, but not in the way that I could about Norfolk or Edinburgh or North Berwick. Don't want to go for the big capitals because that sounds lazy. So it's sort of lesser known parts. So Stephen Davis, who's the chief executive of the Penderyn Distillery, Portmeirion Cymru's Ian Roberts and Paul Lewin from Festiniog and Welsh Highland Railways agreed the country is often overshadowed by Scotland, Ireland and England because of its comparatively weak brand. Their words, not mine. Why does Wales have a weak brand? 0345 6060 973. I don't see much evidence of it being weak when the rugby is on, he says, almost proving the stereotype raised by the man who said that Wales needs a rebrand because it's only known for sheep, wet weather and rugby. And the sheep are on the way out, I think. But as a consequence of Brexit, don't go there, James, leave it. Why does Wales have a weak brand? Does Wales have a weak brand? And if it does, why does it have a weak brand? And how can we improve it? How does it feel to be Welsh in the context of Britishness? Do you feel like a third class? How do you feel being Welsh listening to this programme or this radio station? Are there things that we should be talking about that we don't? It's because there's no particular call for independence and there's no peace agreement that's been put under threat by the person currently in 10 Downing Street. I love this question, and it's been partly suggested by callers to the programme on earlier subjects this week, and I suggested we turn our attention to it. I wasn't sure when, but as you've probably worked out, we're doing it now. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I don't want to sound like Alan Partridge, so I'm not going to say what's it like being Welsh, but I am interested in knowing what it's like being Welsh. It is 18 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're examining the claim in Select Committee, the Welsh Affairs Committee, on Wednesday of this week, that Wales is in rather desperate need of a rebrand. And if you need further explanation, try this on for size. I think you'll struggle to argue with this. If you look at the brand in Wales, and this is the Welsh brand, the brand of Welshness, it is fairly weak compared to the Irish brand and the Scottish brand in particular. Do you agree with that? I think you have to, but if you don't, 0345 6060 973. And if you do and you think you can explain why or how this has happened, the number remains the same. At the moment, I think we get overshadowed quite a bit. Goes a tiny bit simplistic here, I have to say, from the fellow that runs Zip World. At the moment, I think we get overshadowed quite a bit. You've got the royal family down in London, you've got Tartan and Loch Ness in Scotland, and in Ireland, you've got Guinness. So some other suggestions for improving the Welsh brand included more use of the country's name rather than the English version of Wales, so we should call it Cymru, and putting an emphasis on the Welsh language, Bodda. The language needs to be weaponised as an advantage, not a threat, said Mr. Taylor. I feel there's often negative connotations about the language, but our international and English visitors love the use of the Welsh language. What do you reckon? Let's start in that well-known Welsh redoubt of Swindon. That's where Jules is. Jules, what would you like to say?
Good morning. I don't sound like you. I went to private school, so it got beaten. Well, not beaten out.
Did you have an accent before when you were younger?
Yes.
I picked it up then. I got a bit then on the yes. I got a bit there, actually. A little.
I was born in Cardiff and grew up there for 3 or 4 years, and then we moved out to Monmouthshire.
Okay.
So I don't speak Welsh. I just, because when we moved to Monmouthshire was before 74, when it was still officially part of England, and they didn't teach Welsh in the schools. By the time they started teaching Welsh in the schools, I'd already gone to Monmouth. So, where it was far more important that we learned Latin and classical Greek than the language of the country we were actually in. But hey, Anyway, there's this I haven't lived in Wales for over 30 years now, but there's this thing that every Welsh person knows how it feels, even if they can't put a finger on the word, which is called hiraeth, which is like a longing and homesickness. It's more than homesickness. It's just the feeling you get of being Welsh when you're in Wales.
Oh, that's lovely. Say it again.
Hiraeth. Hiraeth, I believe. And I've only learned that word since after I left Wales, because it describes the feeling. And I can relate to the idea that the branding is weak, because I think the Welsh people living in England, who are going to be the people who are sort of communicating the brand every day.
The standard bearers, if you like, the marketeers.
It's a very nebulous thing. You can't really describe what it's like to be Welsh to someone who isn't.
But it's not necessarily about that. It's not that you're supposed to be converting people to Welshness. I don't think that's...
Indeed not, but...
Just to an enthusiasm for what you're supposed to be selling the country. Yes, exactly that.
When you can't really...
articulate it yourself.
When it's just a feeling. And Wales objectively has got enormous things going for it. Just the other week, my family and I, we went to... we rented a cabin just by Bridgend.
Okay.
We went up into the valleys. There's a waterfall there just above Treherbert, where my uncle used to run a pub.
Right.
And called the Dunraven. It's flats now, but some people might remember it. Oh. And it was the most beautiful waterfall.
Yeah. You
I've
see,
ever seen
I
in the
can do
UK.
that. I could do that with Yorkshire. I could do it with Cumbria. I could do it with the Peak
District. 20
District.
years, nobody said anything
That's
about
a brilliant example. It makes me feel less bad about the gaps in my own knowledge, my own sort of cultural arsenal. But why? Why would that be? Why would that be? 03456060973. Jules, I'm moving on because I want to squeeze in as many calls as I can on this subject for fairly obvious reasons. David is also not in Wales. He's in Birmingham, but I presume you're from Wales.
Yes, very much so. Pnawn da, James.
Thank you.
So I'm. There's something that you said about not really much of a call for independence
compared to Scotland. Don't start taking chunks out of me yet, pal.
No. Yeah, you're right. Certainly, we're definitely not at the place where we are with Scotland. They're a lot further ahead than we are. However, when you look at polling in Wales at the moment for independence, we're actually at the same sort of polling level as Scotland was when it first announced its 2014 referendum.
That's interesting.
So it's about 34%, which was yes in Scotland. And that's roughly not far off where we're at in Wales as well.
I did not know that.
In terms of brand, I'm the son of a Welsh speaker. I was born in England, but I've always supported Wales. I'm a mammy's boy, so yeah.
But do you recognise this description of the and it's unfortunate language in a way because it's all very marketish and PR-ish, but the brand is weak. Do you recognise that description? Because I do.
I would say yes, I do, because Wales has always been seen as an afterthought. It's been seen as an afterthought for generations. We were the Industrial Revolution in this country would not have happened without Welsh coal. The things to do. You can even go back to Roman times with the gold mines, but I mean that's probably a bit far back. But still, there's so much about the country.
It would have been subjugated by the English, wouldn't it? That's the point.
Absolutely.
A lot of the culture and the history would have almost... I think Mark Drakeford explained this to me when he did Full Disclosure, that a lot of it was almost censored by English sensibilities.
Yeah, I've listened to that podcast. Yeah, so I think one of the things that is sort of having a bit of a turn, and people are sort of realising, oh yeah, there's this entire forgotten country in the UK that is, known about and exists, but it's just Wales. It's an afterthought.
That's the weird bit. Isn't it?
I think it's mainly come down to the pandemic, and we've realised that because health has devolved entirely. We've got the GIG in Wales. I can't remember what it stands for now, but yeah.
Well, you can't expect any help from me. I don't know what you're talking about.
The GIG is the NHS.
Oh,
so we've got the Welsh NHS, and it's devolved. We kind of people started to realise, I think, in Wales and certainly around the border of Wales on the English side, because people were moaning about it enough that they couldn't go over to their holiday homes, that we are just as good at making rules and if not better.
Yeah,
and we don't have all the scandals that we have in
I'm sure it's not perfect. Just before I start getting the same text that I got about Gandhi, I'm sure it's not perfect, but Mark Drakeford did emerge, didn't he? Very much so, as on a par with Nicola Sturgeon and Boris Johnson during that and the press conferences. He was certainly the only leader that would speak to us on this programme regularly about what was going on in Wales, and that was a very conscious decision on my part to reflect the huge number of people listening to the programme there who must sometimes feel excluded. And indeed, Owen has confirmed in a tweet that he does sometimes feel a little bit excluded when we are discussing issues without much reference, or, if we're honest, mate, any reference at all. On my part to Wales or the Welsh people. So there's definitely something in this. The why of it, that's another one. 0345 606 0973. Another mention for Mark Drakeford's full disclosure. There's loads to talk about in Wales, James. It was a fab episode, and since then he has stayed true to his unassuming quiet fight for progress. Free school meals, trials for sustainable living, the second home debate. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these things. And Gary writes, the perfect opportunity to plug your podcast with Charlotte Church. I'd say full disclosure, has probably done a better job of promoting the Welsh brand than the radio show has, actually, on reflection, until today. Thank you, David. Jack's in Pontypridd. Jack, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James, and great pronunciation there of the double D at the end of the,
I tried.
Of the pod.
I half swallowed it in case I got it wrong between you and me.
You're all good there, really good. I hear it so many times on other radio stations where it's Pontypridd and things like that. You just you squirm a little bit and go, oh, it's not quite right, that, is it? Yeah, what do I want to say? They've said rugby. Now, rugby in Wales at the moment, it's in a dire state. And
Jack said that, not me. Carry on.
And it's not just about the pitch, what's happening on the pitch. It's to do with the atmosphere created by the governing union. Now, in contrast, the football movement in Wales has become, nationalist is not quite the right word, but it's become very focused on the Welsh language. The FAW, the governing body of the Football Association of Wales, have made it very important that the Welsh language is part of the football and it's part of the match day experience. In contrast, if you go to watch the Welsh rugby national side, it just feels like you're a consumer, and it's all about the day out, or having people having so much to drink that they can't remember where they are. Whereas around the football, there's been kind of a nationalist movement around it. I heard you speak to a chap a couple of weeks ago. You were asking him about the song sang before
that's right.
The game against Ukraine, and We Are Still Here. And it's a reminder that in Wales, we're not just about rugby, we're about the Welsh language, and it's been really well promoted by the Football Association of Wales recently. And I said to your researcher on the phone as well, those free stereotypes, or those free branding bits, they just feel like stereotypes that
doesn't. I mean, but you're challenging them because they're true. I mean, there are lots and lots of people who don't think much beyond sheep and rugby when they think, and singing and male voice choirs. I'm surprised you didn't stick that on the list. But it shouldn't be like that, because there is, as you're telling us, so much more to offer. And
there's a lot of what people who don't realise who have not been to Wales before is how diverse the country is. I mean, I'm in Pontypridd, and we've a rivalry with a town about 2 miles down the road. You know, it's that diverse that Welsh people are different.
Why just use me as a guinea pig? I mean, I grew up in Kidderminster, so we holidayed in Abbot a couple of times, and a lot of people from the Midlands head across to Wales, or used to. There's the answer, isn't it? It's package holidays, partly.
So where you are as well.
You'd have got a lot of English holiday makers in Wales pre-package holidays and pre-cheap flights, and also it was in an era when a lot of Welsh history and tradition was kind of under pressure from deliberate English attempts to sort of quash it, whether you're talking about the language or whether you're talking about the history of rebellion.
Well, I got my great-grandparents lived in a time where speaking Welsh was actively punished in schools.
That's it.
You had the block around your neck if you were a Welsh speaker and you weren't allowed to speak it. But now we're in an era where the language is in a resurgence, so there's much more to Wales than just rugby. It's about.
Do you know what you need?
What's that?
I'm only half joking.
Go on.
You need someone to do a Braveheart on Owen Glendower.
Oh, do you want to be the actor?
You want to make someone to make a film, but we're doing for Owen Glendower what Braveheart did for William Wallace, and then I reckon that would advance the Welsh brand by about 50 years overnight. So you make some calls, Jack. Seriously, so that would be my top tip for enhancing the Welsh brand. And I am only half. In fact, I'm only 48% joking. I'm 52% serious. It's 12:31. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. 12:35 is the time. A brief journey from Wales to the other side of the Atlantic, because I've referred you a few times to the inquiry going on into events in America on January the 6th, 2021, and I felt we needed a little bit of expert guidance, because what is coming out of this inquiry is it is objectively breathtaking, and then you remember that it is happening in America, and it becomes somehow even more breathtaking, and then you remember that the forces that saw, just to pick one headline from today's British newspapers, Pence and his wife hid from mob during Capitol riot. You remember the forces that led these rioters with baying for the vice president's blood had essentially been unleashed by the president, the defeated president, who continues to canvass and enjoy support from prominent Republican politicians who continue to amplify and disseminate his blatant lie about the result of that election. Thankfully, Sarah Baxter is here to help us. Sarah's a former deputy editor of the Sunday Times, now back in America covering, all issues American. I almost feel bad, Sarah, asking you to give us a thumbnail sketch of what's going on, because it is so huge and there are so many fronts. But can we start with what is, in your view, the biggest revelations to emerge in the last couple of days?
Yeah, the big revelation is that Donald Trump knew very well that what he was pressuring Mike Pence, his own vice president, to do was completely unconstitutional and illegal. And honestly, if it wasn't Donald Trump, and frankly, I think that his opponents would be nervous of putting him in front of a jury where half the country appears to support him, you would say that they were mounting a very effective case for prosecuting Donald Trump for inciting violence at the Capitol, inciting the overthrow of the election results on no grounds whatsoever. But as it is, I think what this January 6th committee was doing yesterday in discussing this pressure campaign against the vice president was to prove that the president and his acolytes, his advisors, knew they were willfully deceiving the American people.
Was there reasonable doubt about that previously?
Not really. I mean, I thought your summary was very effective, James, in the sense that what we've been witnessing at the January 6th hearings has been totally shocking, but nothing compares to the shock I think we all felt when the Capitol was being breached on January 6th. And then to compound the shock over that has been the normalization of that riot and the idea that it wasn't that bad and people should stop going on about it. And there may have been dodgy things going on with the election. Nobody's quite sure. Therefore, it's quite acceptable to think somehow that Trump might well be justified in thinking it was stolen when it never was. So I think what we heard yesterday was mounting evidence from within Trump's inner circle itself that even people promulgating the idea the election was stolen and that Mike Pence had the right to do something about it and refused to count the votes, knew they were wrong, knew they didn't have a big chance of success at the Supreme Court, even a conservative Supreme Court, and that they were just engaged in a mass deception of the American public.
Now, Mike Pence and Fox News continues to promulgate the idea that Mike Pence somehow did have the right. I think they've been doing it today while we've been on air. But the language is important. He didn't have the right to do it. There was no constitutional right to do it. But in a sense, he could have done it. I've seen one commentator describe it as it would have been a form of revolution taking place in the context of a constitutional crisis. But he could have done it. And some words I never thought I'd say out loud. Some people suggesting that he became a sort of hero of the hour by refusing to do so.
Yes, I mean, he did his duty on that day, and it was very, very important that a senior politician did his duty, because it appeared that Donald Trump was, in dereliction of his duty. So the vice president was the one who said, "No, I don't have the right to do this, and it doesn't matter how many times you tell me I do. I am not going to refuse to count the votes of the Electoral College and certify Joe Biden and overturn the election." Now, a lot of what we heard yesterday as well in the committee was that Donald Trump's more gung-ho supporters and advisors, including a lawyer called John Eastman, who I think is in some criminal trouble, thought it wouldn't be a bad thing if it did end up being settled on the street, so to speak, that violence, he seemed to have taken a light attitude towards the role of violence in American history. And we heard from a senior Republican judge, Judge Luttig, that if Mike Pence had behaved as Donald Trump was ordering him to, and calling him a wimp and worse, the P word they called it, for not doing this, that there could have been a revolution within a constitutional crisis. Those were his words.
Good grief. And I think the previous chap you referred to was the one who was put on the spot by a colleague and told that this would go 9-0 in the Supreme Court, and he began to argue it would go 7-2 before finally conceding. The fellow in favour of violence would actually end up being 9-0. You're a journalist, Sarah, not a psychologist, so I'm not sure the next question is fair, but you've referred to the fact that all of this is unfolding in a country where half of the population, give or take, remains, is it fair to say, persuaded by the lie that is being examined here and supportive of the events of that day?
They want to believe it.
Yes.
Yeah. You have to remember that although Joe Biden won the election fair and square with a historic, record-breaking tally of votes, Donald Trump got more votes than any other Republican president in history, or candidate. So that's an awful lot of people in the country who wanted to see him re-elected as president, and don't know anybody particularly within their own circle, or know only a very few handful of people who actually liked Joe Biden or voted for him, because America's so split between the sort of rural areas, the cities, etc., that they actually think, well, everybody I know voted for Donald Trump, so he must be right about the election being stolen.
Okay.
And I mean, I've literally heard that said, because I spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania, which is split down the middle and was one of the contested states. And so many people just tell me that without even me introducing the topic. They want to talk about how the election was stolen.
I didn't realise that. I didn't realise it was in the bloodstream in that way. But because prominent Republican politicians some of them, or many of them, must know that it's not true. But they are, in a sense, they're the dogs being wagged by the tails that you describe.
Exactly so.
It's frightening, right?
It's alarming, to be honest, because among the other things that you can hear is not just that, people think the election was stolen, which is also code, I'm afraid, for, the wrong sort of Americans voted.
Yes.
I mean, Donald Trump was very specific about, he didn't like the fact that, the things that made the difference in the swing states were the inner cities. Where subliminally there's a sort of dog whistle that means there's too many black voters in the inner cities, and that in inverted commas, white America voted for Donald Trump. So there's a very sort of subliminal message running underneath that makes people think that somehow the election was unfair. This is very, very complicated. Yeah. Quite nasty stuff that relates to some ugly divisions going back a long way in American history.
Of course it does, but in terms of what will soon be American history, what is the purpose? I mean, you've mentioned that criminal charges or criminality may attach itself to some of the people even giving evidence. What is the sort of likely outcome, given that the evidence you're describing is pretty much incontrovertible? Where will retribution or recourse land?
Well, if the rest of if the American economy was going gangbusters, if everything was going great for Joe Biden, you could see some very serious consequences. But the fact is that there are a lot of other issues that America's obsessed about, which is high inflation, now high interest rates, tanking stock market, etc., which means that come midterm elections, which are fast approaching now in the autumn, the Democrats might not even have a majority in Congress, in which case the Gen 6 committee deliberations are going nowhere.
Doesn't matter.
But they are there for the history books.
Yes.
And I think people feel it's important to have a record of what went on.
Even as many continue to ignore the evidence of their eyes and ears. Sarah Baxter, so thank you so much. That really, I mean, you really rose to the challenge of giving us an exhaustive account of the salient points in a relatively small amount of time. I'm very grateful to you for that. Sarah, you can follow on Twitter to find out what journalism she is publishing, and former deputy editor, as I mentioned, of the Sunday Times as well. Fox News not even showing the hearings, as far as I'm aware. Julian Suffolk's just reminded me of that, because they don't want you to know. They don't want Americans to know what is happening and what is real, which leads us back, doesn't it, to that little section I did not long ago on these bizarre allegations that the BBC is biased, and the realisation live on the radio that allegation has been levelled at the BBC by people who don't want you to know stuff that is happening, and that makes anyone who is telling you stuff that is happening biased. So Fox News doesn't even broadcast the hearings, because if you don't broadcast them, then for Fox News viewers, they're not happening. It's 12:45. 12:49 is the time. Time for at least one more call, possibly two, before I give you a little taste of this week's Full Disclosure with Wes Streeting, who is, I suspect, deeply tired of being described as a potential future Labour leader. But having sat down with him for an hour, I would personally describe him as a potential future Labour leader. I can't wait to find out what you make of the encounter. But back to Wales first. Owen is in Oxford, and I can tell by the way that your name is spelt that you are Welsh. What would you like to say, Owen?
Yes, so I'm from North Wales, which is, I think, a bit different to the most of the callers so far. Okay. And I've lived in Wales my whole life, apart from now, and I've had to move for work.
Right.
Which is a big problem, because despite what this article, this discussion is saying, tourism is a massive, massive thing in North Wales. My parents live in near Abbot.
Yes.
And every year, every time there's a half term, every time there's a holiday, every time the weather gets better, it's swarmed by people coming from England over to camp, go on holiday, and basically everything is revolving around tourism.
Yes.
And towns become inundated, essentially. And the people that are coming over, they treat Wales and Welsh as a novelty, almost.
Go on, what do you mean by that?
So in Gwynedd, which is where Aberdaron is and where my parents live, Welsh is, I think it's the highest spoken area in Wales where Welsh is spoken. And a neighbour in the village forgot how to speak English over the lockdown. She's that Welsh.
Good grief. What a great story.
So people, I know, it's fantastic, isn't it? So people talk Welsh, they speak Welsh all the time, all the signs are in Welsh. A lot of the signs don't have English on them.
Right.
But when people come over, they're like, oh, that's nice, now speak in English, please. Obviously, they don't speak Welsh, but it's treated almost like a novelty. And
so what would improving the brand look like then? And I'm not comfortable with that language, but that's the language that was used in the Welsh Affairs Committee, so it's the language that we're using here today.
I think stressing the independence of Wales from England.
Cultural independence, the distinctness of its history.
Yeah, because a lot of the time, going back to what the last caller said about Owain Glyndwr,
yes,
he's one of the biggest Welsh heroes, but people in England don't know about him.
You need a Braveheart, mate. I'm sticking with that. You need Hollywood to get involved.
But again, he is one of the few characters that are known. There's so many more.
Yeah,
you have Hywel with his law codes. You have Owain Lawgoch, and all these other characters who weren't connected with England. Owain Glyndwr was a knight in England before he rose up in rebellion. So it's one of those things where history has made Wales essentially a part of England. And it's true that Henry VIII made Wales a part of England judicially, and it's still treated like it. It's not treated like a separate independent country, which is within the United Kingdom.
Although it's getting better, no? I mean, this sense of identity is actually growing. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. In your lifetime, absolutely. I'm thinking it's grown. I don't know how old you are, but probably in your 20s or 30s.
Yeah, 20s. It's definitely there. But having lots of people come across the board, especially after COVID, they treated Wales like England. So Wales had restrictions on a lot longer than England did.
Yes.
And, of course, when restrictions were lifted in England, people came over to Wales on holiday immediately.
Yes.
without consulting.
And Mark Dreyford got very frustrated about this, and it's interesting to hear it from the point of view of the public, the Welsh public as well, for whom today, whether you realise it or not, I have decided that you are speaking, Owain, for the Welsh. This is a really interesting conversation, and given that I've been a little remiss over the years in my coverage of both Scottish and Northern Irish politics, I think I'm going to add Welsh categorically to the list of areas in which we must do better. Thank you, and apologies to anybody else waiting to contribute to that conversation. I promise you we'll have it again in almost identical form sooner rather than later, but I want to give you quite a long taster of my full disclosure interview with Wes Streeting, the Shadow Secretary of State for Health and widely regarded as a future Labour leader and therefore potentially a future Prime Minister. It's up to you what you think of it, but I wonder if you can tell what I felt.
I think my parents and my granddad in particular, my dad's dad, who's probably the single most influential person in my life, really encouraged me to have ambition, to aim high. He was only in my life for 11 years until he died, but those were kind of 11 formative, special years where, he kind of really nurtured my love of learning. Gave me a sense that I could achieve anything I wanted to.
Would he articulate that explicitly? Would he say, you can do anything you want, Wes? Don't let anybody else tell you what you want.
And teachers as well. That's the other group of people I wouldn't want to miss out. And, there are so many teachers from primary school right through secondary school who really encouraged me to aim high. My sort of form teacher, Colin Nash, my English teacher, Eleanor Soto, my history teacher, Derek James, who probably very proud that I ended up in politics and not surprised but disappointed I'm in the Labour Party rather than the Conservative Party.
As I think your granddad would have been.
Yeah, he was, yeah. And that's the funny thing about my granddad. Hugely influential, but politically, if he was still alive, I've no doubt I'd be going around to see him on a Friday like I used to as a kid, and we'd have big rows about politics.
When I started on LBC, and I'd express, because I have a different background from you, I went to public school, and it would have been astonishing if I hadn't gone to university. And then I ended up doing this job by accident, and I used to express my confusion about certain attitudes. And the phrase that always popped up in my inbox was, you just don't understand working class Tories. And in many ways, I still don't. I've got to be honest with you. But your granddad was one.
Yeah, I think.
Do you understand that?
Yeah, very much so. And it helps me now in terms of my job, because, the only reason I won my constituency in 2015, which was a Conservative seat, and we didn't do well in the 2015 election. We lost seats. We only gained 10 seats from the Conservatives, and I got the biggest swing in the country from the Conservatives to Labour. And the thing to understand about working class Tories like my granddad is patriotism, love of Queen and country, belief in law and order, and a conviction that the left doesn't care about law and order. This is a right-wing agenda. Strong commitment to the armed forces. And again, wrongly, when you look at defence spending, it always goes up under Labour governments, goes down under Tory governments, but that's not the perception. So that would be a big part of my granddad's outlook. But also there is a thing of, which is ironic when you look at sort of my two families, really, my dad's family and mum's family, in terms of their experiences. There is also a thing that says, we've pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps. We go out, we work hard, we don't take from anyone, we don't steal anything, we don't rely on the benefit system. Whereas those people over there, they're the ones on the benefit system. They're too lazy. They're the ones with kind of nowadays or back then sort of Sky dishes outside the house. So I think there's a sort of and
it's carefully stoked that as well, of course.
Oh, of course, and this is the thing that makes my blood boil about Conservative politics, is it pits working class people against each other and makes people believe that the reason that their incomes aren't good enough and their life chances aren't good enough is because of other working class people over there, and not about the way in which decisions are made, who's making them, in whose interests they're making them. And so that drives me up the wall. But that does give me an understanding to sort of meet voters, because this is the thing about politics. We're an evangelical religion. You've got to win over converts, and I've never ever won an argument or won someone over by opening a conversation by saying, "Well, you were stupid to vote that way," or "You're stupid to think that. Why don't you come with me instead?" And I think that's where sometimes, particularly in the Labour Party, because we have to be humble about the fact that in our more than 100-year history now, we lose more than we win. Yes. I do think that sometimes there is a there's a righteousness to the left that I find appealing, which is why I'm on the left, wanting to tackle burning injustice. But sometimes we allow that to spill over into self-righteousness. And I think we always got to meet people where they are, understand them, and then offer them a better future and a better offer as to how you can achieve their ambitions or help them to achieve their ambitions, rather than kind of lecturing them or hectoring them or patronising them.
Yeah, I think it was probably Orwell who said something about the right is always looking for recruits while the left is always looking for traitors to expel.
There are so many great Orwell quotes, but I 100% agree with that. And I see that on the left so often, like from my time in student politics right through to today, and it just drives me up the wall.
Me too. Wes Streeting there, a very, very interesting newish arrival in the political firmament. Do have a full listen to that proper sit-down, in-depth chat on my Full Disclosure podcast series, which you can get wherever you get your podcasts, most obviously, of course, that Global Player app. That's it from me for another week. I'll see you in Dublin tonight if you're around, and otherwise, let's catch up on Monday morning. Here's Sheila. 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 Catch up on Monday morning. Here's Sheila.